The U.S. started the war in Iran, but China might be the ones to win it. I'm Jim VandeHei. I'm CEO, co-founder of Axios, here to talk about the implications of the Iranian war on China.
China may be more insulated than most.
Taking the path of diplomacy.
China's strategy is to use this crisis to build its economic strength and global influence.
If you step back and you think about the world, you think about the challenges for the U.S., China wanting to eat our lunch militarily, diplomatically, technologically is the single biggest threat to U.S. dominance long term. And so while the war doesn't necessarily involve China directly, it has massive implications for China. China has laid out a 25-year plan, a 50-year plan, a short-term plan, and it's all designed to displace us by having more economic might, more diplomatic might, technological might, and ultimately more military might. Let's start with the military lesson. If you're China and you've made it clear that you want to take over Taiwan, and you know that the United States is opposed to you invading, you just had a live experiment on how the United States fights wars in foreign lands surrounded by water. You're able to watch the weapons that we use, the strategy that we use, how we move our formations of carriers, you name it. And you're able to watch how we depleted massive stockpiles of weapons.
CNN has learned that the U.S. military has significantly depleted its stockpile of key missiles during the war with Iran. And according to experts, this reduction is so severe it has created a near-term risk of the U.S. running out of ammunition should a future conflict arise.
And these aren't weapons that you can just build tomorrow, right? They often take months, if not years, to get back to that level of scale. So if you're China and you didn't have to send a single drone, a single person, a single missile, and you could study the United States, you could sit back and say, okay, this worked out pretty well for us. Let's talk about energy. Yes, China gets a lot more of its energy going through the Strait of Hormuz than we do, so it has a bigger effect on their oil supply. However, it's important to remember that China anticipated this. They started stockpiling a lot of oil long before we shot the first missile. So they already had kind of an emergency supply at hand. Also, they already are more far advanced than we are when it comes to solar and other alternative forms of energy. So they've already tried to move away from full dependency on oil. And whenever you have an oil shortage, countries and industries that can produce alternatives to it tend to crank up, which is what we've seen in China. So you could end up with China being less dependent on oil. They've been less kind of whipsawed by what's happening in the oil market. Now, people around them have a lot of their allies and a lot of their neighbors have been affected greatly, but China so far has not. Whereas for us, with higher fuel prices, also being at war, also already worried about rising inflation above and beyond oil, it's definitely a domestic political problem here. China's kind of a thuggery, right? It's an authoritarian regime, and they can downplay the negative consequences. Let's talk about diplomatic optics, meaning which country do most other countries want to align with? If you roll back the camera, say 2 years, most countries want to be with the United States. And I think many deep down still do. But they wanted to be with us because they agreed with us on freedom. They agreed with us on rights. They've seen the United States come to protect them in tough times in the past. They like our economy better than they like China's economy. Ours grows faster. Ours is better. Ours is bigger. But over the last 2 years, because of tariffs, because of Donald Trump's rhetoric, you've seen a lot of allies, including close allies like Canada or most of Europe, now look at China and say, well, maybe China's the more stable ally. Maybe China is the better ally based on their economy and based on their supply chain. So if you think about that in the context of this war, you haven't had China making any bellicose threats. You haven't had China waging a war in the Middle East that's having an impact on your own economy. And this war is having a massive impact on the European economy, on the Asian economy. And so you start to feel like, okay, now maybe China is my safer bet. And that has been what China's been trying to do methodically over the last 2 years. Listen, you don't have to be a master of the art of war to understand Donald Trump. You just have to read his own books, right? The Art of the Deal. You know exactly how he plays the game in terms of bluster and bluffing and bullying. And the Chinese have known that, and in many ways have played to that. So they've sat back and they've patiently watched what he's done. And whenever they think he makes a mistake, they try to step in and fill that void, because they realize what a lot of folks in the U.S. realize, which is over time, if you think about AI, if you think about trade, if you think about energy, you think about supply chain, what you ultimately want is the biggest, healthiest, most robust alliance of allies that can all be engaged in your supply chain and in your trade block and in your economic sort of powerhouse grouping of countries. And so from that perspective, the war's been nothing but upside for China. If I had to rank the things that will define the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's us versus China, and it's AI. And really, AI and China are one thing. And the reason that they're one thing is that we're the only two countries that have enough scientists, enough money, enough energy, enough compute to be able to build super intelligence. And so there's a real race going on. And you have to view almost every move we make and they make through that lens. And so if you think about the war, has that helped or hurt us? It's undoubtedly hurt us. I guess on the upside, we've been able to test out our technology and see where AI is working and not working. And we obviously have amazing intelligence, I think way better than the Chinese. And we have amazing artillery. We've seen it each and every day. But if you think about where we're getting a lot of our AI feed, right? The energy, the chips, the data, we just spent 2 years doing huge deals in the Middle East. And so that, if anything, only benefits the Chinese. And so in addition to us, like the distraction of just us having to pay attention to war and then being able to pay attention to building stuff, we have an ally in the AI kind of fight, really our new ally. In some ways, the Middle East replaced Europe as our chief ally, largely because of their capacity and willingness to build AI and AI adjacent products that can benefit the needs that we have in the United States. Finally, let's talk about rare earths. I know it seems like we might be geeking out on what feels like small things, but rare earths are these minerals, these things that are required to actually bring compute to life, to bring AI to life. They are vital. Without them, you can't have any of the advanced systems that we're trying to build. And that is where China has a massive advantage. They just have way more of a lot of precious minerals and that you need to be able to fuel AI. And by the way, a lot of these weapon systems, especially our most advanced weapon systems, are wholly dependent on that supply chain that China controls. So one of the fears that U.S. officials have is that they could be in these negotiations with China over the next couple of months, and China could just say, we're again going to cut off U.S. access to these minerals, to that supply chain. Well, that would make it almost impossible to replenish a lot of the weapon systems that were destroyed or depleted during this war with Iran. So it just shows again the vulnerability that we have to the Chinese dominance over different parts of the supply chain. We have a massive advantage on AI in terms of its capabilities, at least now. I think U.S. officials, every government official I talk to thinks that gets shorter and shorter, and that eventually China catches up. But once they catch up, then all the AI adjacent fights matter most. Who has the best supply chain? Who has the most energy? Who has the cheapest energy? And that's why all of these pieces fit together into probably the most important puzzle in the world today. So let's wrap this up. We've talked about a ton. From the U.S. perspective, listen, there are definitely advantages to the war. Like if we can decapitate and contain Iran, that would be a big victory for the U.S. Iran's been a nuisance, a big nuisance to us. It's killed our people. Its proxies have stirred mischief and mayhem around the world. And we've been able to test out our precision weaponry that's utilizing AI. And I think we've showed the world that our intelligence is second to none, that our weaponry is second to none. That probably sends a little bit of fear into the Chinese about making any moves on Taiwan in the future. But from the Chinese perspective, if you look at the ledger, you'd probably rather be China than the U.S. in terms of who's the winner from this war, because you now have been able to withstand the oil market surge in pricing. You were able to anticipate it. And it shows that the fact that you've been building out all these alternative forms of energy is probably a smart play, and you expedited that during the war. You're able to watch us in real time to see how we use artificial intelligence in a real-time live war. So they're able to study that in case they do invade Taiwan. They've been able to see how we might respond. It's also tightened their control over the supply chain, or showed why their control over the supply chain is a real weakness for the U.S., that there's a lot of minerals, a lot of material that are only produced in China that we need for our military systems and obviously for our artificial intelligence. While they're trailing in artificial intelligence, they've also we took a hit, and they probably took an advantage because we're so dependent on Middle East countries that were attacked by Iran that have now been set back months, potentially years, in some of their work. So long story short, at the end of the day, I think China feels very good that they might have won a war that they didn't fight.